Ooh.
Wow.
So scary. Okay, so here we are, and we are. How is the reading going for? Like, have you been reading it at all? Yes, right. Yeah, we have been reading it. It's okay. So what I wanted to talk. What was that?
So different than in college where you had to lie most of the time about actually doing the reading.
This is the opposite. It's better if you don't read it. No. So I think today it would just be good to go over just like basic principles of atonement and the crucifixion, which I think is like super wild and amazing and not like sort of what we're used to, I think, with like Christian interpretations of it. I think the description of assault and injury is really fascinating. So I thought I would this is from chapter 6, because I know the beginning of discussion of the crucifixion begins in chapter 2, but I just wanted to quickly read maybe just like a chunk from this page, if that's cool.
Yeah.
Just this little section. I don't know what you're saying, but it's really good. What was that? Okay.
We're not there yet.
Okay, I know, but this is like good. This is so okay. The crucifixion is nothing more than an extreme example. Its value, like the value of any teaching device, lies solely in the kind of learning it facilitates. It can be and has been misunderstood. This is only because the fearful are apt to perceive fearfully. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. You have probably reacted for years as if you were being crucified. This is a marked tendency of the separated, who always refuse to consider what they have done to themselves. Projection means anger, anger fosters assault, and assault promotes fear. The real meaning of the crucifixion lies in the apparent intensity of the assault of some of the sons of God upon another. This, of course, is impossible and must be fully understood as impossible. Assault can ultimately be made only on the body. There is little doubt that one body can assault another and can even destroy it. Yet, if destruction itself is impossible, anything that is destructible cannot be real. Whoa. Its destruction, therefore, does not justify anger. To the extent to which you believe that it does, you are accepting false premises and teaching them to others. The message the crucifixion was intended to teach was that it is not necessary to perceive any form of assault and persecution because you cannot be persecuted. If you respond with anger, you must be equating yourself with the destructible and are therefore regarding yourself insanely. I have made it perfectly clear that I am like you, Jesus. Jesus is like us, and you are like me. But our fundamental equality can be demonstrated only through joint decision. You are free to perceive yourself as persecuted if you choose. When you do choose to react that way, however, you might remember that I was persecuted as the world judges and did not share this evaluation for myself. And because I did not share it, I did not strengthen it. Whew. That's pretty amazing shit, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it says, if you react as if you were persecuted, you are teaching persecution. And this is like one of the core ideas of the Course in Miracles that I think is the most fascinating and pretty esoteric, is that we build the ego world that we live in is built around scarcity, consciousness, and lack. And we think that when we give something to someone, something is being taken from us, or that we have to receive something in return. When in reality, we're living in a world of ideas and a projection of our ideas. And so whatever ideas we share with the world are actually strengthened. So when we perceive ourselves as being persecuted or capable of being made victims, we are strengthening that idea, and we perpetuate it over and over and over again. So that's something that I think is really, really intense and incredible, especially with the example of the crucifixion, because that's like the most famous example of persecution, like in Western religion. He literally got nailed to a cross. But the cool thing is that the last thing he says is, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And so the answer to the crucifixion is forgiveness. And we do that through atonement, which is the other theme that we've been sort of working on. So I think right now where we're at society, in our society, and like what's going on in the world around us, it's very important that we like foster a sense, not fostering a sense, like we foster the idea that we are not being persecuted, even when it's really, really hard not to think that way. And even our progressive way of like changing things that we don't like around us and making things better, especially in the US, it seems like is very much built around perpetuating victimhood and treating people as victims. Yeah. And I love this because it's like, no, that's the opposite of what we should be doing. So, and it says throughout the book, and this is great, the crucifixion cannot be shared because it is the symbol of projection, but the resurrection is the symbol of sharing because it is the reawakening of every son of God, and it is necessary to enable the sonship to know its wholeness. Only this is knowledge. The message of the crucifixion is perfectly clear. Teach only love, for that is what you are. If you interpret the crucifixion in any other way, you are using it as a weapon for assault rather than as the call for peace for which it was intended. So that's pretty intense, I think. It's hard to imagine. One of the interesting things about this book is that it treats the body simply as a learning device. Like it says the body is totally neutral and it changes and it fades. The form of the body will be like gently laid down when it is not needed anymore. But we perceive illness and attack on the body all the time. And so the crucifixion is so important because it's literally the destruction of a body, but you can't destroy the soul or like the love behind it, if that makes sense. So I don't know if that idea makes people feel a little bit better, or if is that something you can buy? Like, does that make sense, or is it like, no?
Yes, it makes sense.
I think it makes sense intellectually and even emotionally to an extent, especially if you're, tuning into your higher self and just understanding from that place. But what's hard for me throughout this reading is to understand sort of what's meant by a defense that cannot attack is the best defense.
Yes.
And that being sort of the underlying assumption of the meek shall inherit the earth. They will literally take it over because of their strength. So I get that. I get strength and vulnerability and strength and, being soft and sort of this idea of ultimate surrender. But on a daily lived experience level, I am struggle bus. I'm not sure how to sort of accept that, psychically, emotionally, and then live in the world and foster atonement in a way that is far reaching. I can't make that connection yet.
Yeah. Wow. That's really good. That's very, very, that's very profound actually. Well, I think a lot of it, for me personally, one example I think of a lot is, even though I don't agree like at all with the caste system or like perpetuating inequality. The one example I think of all the time was, well, in particular, like Gandhi's nonviolent resistance to the colonialists, and how that was literally an example of the meek taking over the earth. Like they refused to participate, like they were squarely versed in a nonviolent resistance and refused to participate like in the same violent consciousness that caused the problem in the first place, if that makes sense. And then like in the US, the only example of like a social justice movement that like really had an effect on me was definitely like the mostly Christian based progressive nonviolent civil rights movement in the 60s, like that, because it seemed like they had this very deep understanding that when you're defending yourself and you're in a state of attack, you are showing the opposite side that they are actually capable of attacking and successfully hurting you. So you're participating in it. And so I think the way of being nonviolent and having a trust in like a bigger force that is truly invisible, you can't see it, you have to have faith in it. And I think it's possible, but it is difficult for us because it literally goes against everything that we have been born into. Like the most brilliant part about this book is that it breaks down how the mind works and what the ego is. And so it's like we're brought into a world of death and violence and scarcity, and that's all we see. Like, and so this is why we analyze perception so much, is because we're missing so much because we can't perceive it. And so we've like pinched ourselves off from this source, which is so much more powerful. Does that make any sense? Is that helpful or no?
Yeah, it's like basically trying to crawl your way out of Plato's cave. And
yeah,
I completely, or the Matrix, you know, I mean, there's so many stories over, you know, centuries that have just talked about what you described. But then the question is, you know, like what happens on the way, like how do you define sacrifice? Like what qualifies as a sacrifice worth making? And this reading really did a great job, I think, of making these concepts so simple and personal as just a starting point to talk about things that get, you know, more complex.
Absolutely.
So I really appreciate it for that.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah, and I'll say I appreciate the fact that it just brings up such a deep awareness, and I think that's what it comes down to. It like day to day life is definitely super intense depending on where you're living, especially right now, which I find it to be a very important time to start, you know, diving deep into these things and trying to unlearn things that societies or people, communities have like tried to instill in us, you know? So it's like, it's such a, it just goes down to how we're programmed. And yeah, I do think the awareness is so important, and that's probably the one thing we can control, and to have control over anything. That's like how we perceive anything, essentially. It just comes down to that.
And the atonement and forgiveness, like the atonement is just any way that works for the individual in undoing the past and undoing like our past miseries and lacks of love. Like it says over and over again, like the atonement's different for everybody, and it has to be in words that the individual can understand. So it's like any way that you find that helps you move past these ideas of like scarcity and attack and fear, like that's really, really good. And it's like, I love the line that comes up over and over again where it says like we're trying to reach salvation, and salvation is nothing more than right-mindedness, which is really, really like that's all we have to do is like fix the way that our minds are interpreting and responding to the situations around us. And it says over and over again, like, forgiveness does nothing, because everything that we're seeing is like, it's a hallucination. It's not like, guilt is something that we made up. It's something that the ego has created in order to like preserve itself and attack and perpetuate this feedback loop of just like misery and fear and more guilt. But it doesn't need to be like that. Like, it's not real, but it is. And I love how this book says, like, nothing that a child of God makes is not trivial. So we're not going to fix the ego by pretending that it doesn't have an effect on us, because we made it, and because our minds are joined with God, it is powerful. And so I think that's very important to remember. And it just says over and over again, like, we are far too tolerant of mind wandering and letting our minds pull us down this misery river of shit. And we have to, it says you need to constantly search your mind for the scraps of fear that you allow to dominate your perception, which I think is very, very important. And it says you have to be vigilant. Like, we have to do this, but you don't be vigilant, and you can defend and deny, but like, you don't do that by further attacking. So sorry if that makes things even more confusing, but yeah, it's, and it, oh, what? Okay.
Well, that makes sense to me. One thing I have noticed since starting to read is that I'm becoming a lot more aware of how much fear motivates a lot of my actions, and how it's kind of impossible to have both fear and love at the same time,
Yes.
as a sort of motivation for action. And I don't know, I agree that on a day-to-day level, it's hard you can't force yourself to feel love for other people, or just, to just immediately just replace your motivation and how you interact with the world with love, or forgiving others. But I have been able to more and more, I think, just sense when the reason I'm feeling a certain way or feeling like I have to do something is basically because of fear, of being afraid of losing something, or yeah, and that's been very, very powerful for me and helpful, actually.
That's amazing.
That's totally relatable. And I will say one thing. I think it's important to know that, like, fear and love, like, you're always going to feel both. You need both in order to feel, like, you need fear in order to feel love. Again, like, it comes in waves. So you should always, like, right, Birdie?
Well,
am I right? Or no?
You're right.
Like, another, like, you can never. Oh, actually, I'm gonna shut up. Actually,
don't shut up. It's all right. No.
It's, as a human being,
Yes.
we have our ups and downs, right? Love, or happy, sad, fear, love, like, whatever. The opponents always play a part. But it's just again, going back to the awareness, though. Like,
yeah, no, that's really smart. Okay. Well, like, that's very wise. Like,
it's okay to feel those things, to feel fear. Like, it's okay. It's all okay.
Yeah, you just don't judge it. That's
right.
You don't feed it. You don't entertain it. And the book says, like, we operate in the world in a state of paralysis because our mind is split. And like, the mind should not be, like, we're split between fear and love, and these, like, two things. And it's like, there's a chapter in there called God or the Ego. And when our minds are constantly going back and forth between fear and love and siding with one or both at the same time, like, it leads to a state of, like, I don't even know what the word entropy means, but it leads to a bad state. And so it's like, you have to make a conscious decision to side with the side of love. And then as the book goes on, it goes very much in depth about like, you don't, the very idea that we have to analyze fear and get to the bottom of it and like understand it, that in itself is giving fear credit and like validating it as a value system that has power over us. When in reality, like, all we have to do is just look at it and know that we created it, and it doesn't have to be like that. Like, it doesn't have to be there. So, I mean, yes, you're right. And what Eve, what you're saying, like, makes sense from like a very like Taoist, like non-dualist perspective, which is part of what this book is getting at. But the book also says, like, I mean, and maybe the book's wrong, but the course does say, like,
It's not wrong.
you get to choose, like, you get to choose. And it says you think you're responsible for your behavior, but not your mind. But in reality, the only thing you can be responsible for is what you think. And so we've given that autonomy up. And as a result, like, we can't take responsibility for anything that we do. And that's why we forgive. I mean, that's why Jesus forgave everybody for literally nailing him to a cross. It's because it's just bodies assaulting each other. That's not the truth. Like, the truth is that there's like this force of undying love in the universe that loves us and wants us all to join. And that they're like, I always think like Jesus being on the cross being like, you guys crucified yourselves. Like, that's what they're doing. Is so when we attack people, we're just attacking ourselves. And so that's what we're trying to do, is like break that habit. But it takes willingness. I mean, that's what it says over and over again. Like, the mind what it says, the mind wants truth, but the mind must want truth truly, which is kind of a mouthful, but it's like, you really have to want it. And that willingness, that's all you need, is a kernel of willingness to let the light in. And it will, I mean, sometimes it's easy. And then other times you have to like sit on your bed and like cry for a little while, being like, God, help me, please, something. And then it, like, if that makes sense. Sorry, that's a lot.
There's like a particular section, I forget because I annotated it wrong, but it's number 5. It says fear is always a sign of strain arising whenever what you want conflicts with what you do. And then it talks about sort of feeling rage at being coerced, and then projecting that, you know, onto the external. And then it ends with the author saying, whenever there is fear, it is because you have not made up your mind.
Yes.
And that to me was like kind of a perfect way to make sense of, you know, what Eve was talking about in terms of like love and fear seeming to coexist. It's hard though to not get caught up in analyzing, you know, the depths of fear, because like what we were saying before, we're just born into sort of the state of darkness, right? And then we have to sort of like crawl our way out. And love is so simple, right? Love is just sort of this eternal everythingness, and fear as sort of what we're used to occludes that. And that's sort of like, I think, a main point of the project here, figuring out why all unhappy families are different and every happy family is the same, right? Like that's what we're dealing with on so many levels.
That's so great. That's really, really good. I mean, and the more like the more that you read the book, the more it goes into that. And it says, it's like, the first principle of miracles is that there's no order of difficulty in miracles. Like, one is not harder or more challenging to perform than another. And it's like it's the same thing with all of these kinds of like fears and guilt projections that we have. Like, we order them. We create a hierarchy of like things that are scarier than others, things that are worse than others, things that are more painful than others. But the course says it's all the same. Like, they all arise from a lack of love. And it also says over and over again, it says you have but 2 emotions. You have fear and love, and that's it. So it's, yeah. And I like too that it's like, it says all fear is ultimately reducible to the basic misperception that you have ability to usurp the power of God. Of course, you neither can nor have been able to do this. It's like we need something else. Like we created this, and I mean, as it says over and over again, it's like we all have this massive authority problem that we created ourselves. And because we think we created ourselves, we think that this is very Freudian. So this is gonna I didn't realize how Freudian this was, but someone was talking about this book as an analysis of like the Oedipal complex to like kill one's father. And I don't want to go into that too much, but like at all, but we do have this authority problem and this need to like think that we can destroy that which is bigger than us and that will help us. So yeah, it's just about, I think, participating in different thought systems. Like this book is not about action. It says, like, my favorite line in the whole book is, in order to have peace, teach peace to learn peace. And I love that, because we learn, like, it's like what you said, Michelle, like it's really, really hard because we have been conditioned over and over and over again for centuries upon centuries upon centuries in dominator society that that's all there is. But our escape from that is through trust in something bigger and just practicing peace over and over again, and like going into every interaction with others with like with love and forgiveness in your heart. Because it's true that when you let people attack you, or you perceive yourself as being attacked, you are strengthening that belief. So like you're allowing them to hurt you even more, and we don't want that. Like Jesus like didn't protest once. Like after he was arrested, he let them carry him to they let them take him away. He let them beat the shit out of him and carry the cross up the hill, and he like let them get nailed to a cross, and he rose anyway, and he's like, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. And that to me is the most inspiring thing ever, because by letting that happen, you're not participating in the violence of the world, which is like easier said than done. But it even says in the chapter on the crucifixion, like that is the most extreme example you could possibly find. And it's probably not going to get that bad for you. But even if it did, like you are part of, Jesus was a man and like, or a human being. And we are like that too. We are all the children of God. God has one son. Like we're all a part of that. So sorry I'm talking so much. I don't know if any of this is helping.
I mean, what you're saying is so true, but it brings up like another, conflict that I've been thinking about, in addition to this reading, just how do we define violence, and the idea that violence is commonly thought of as just purely a physical act, right? And Gandhi is said to have practiced nonviolence because he didn't kill or order others to kill or, be physically harmful. Yeah. But can violence also exist in the mind, right? And this reading says like there's no such thing as really the physical. The physical is just a tool of the mind. And could it also be argued that movements like Gandhi's, or movements that call for peaceful action, in some ways also rely on the threat of violence or the fear of violence in a reactionary sense to put forward, the change that they want to see in the world? And I think about that today too. Like, what are the boundaries of violence, and what can we say that we're being peaceful if we're protesting, even if we're not advocating, physical harm? I'm not so sure. Like, ideas can be violent, maybe. Well, that's also been argued as part of like the woke movement in ways that I don't personally, agree with. But there's merit to the question, I think.
Well, I mean, you have to accept the premise that it's all a mass hallucination and none of it's actually real, which is really, really
Yes.
hard.
Yes.
And that like you're supposed to, like, the one person I've heard talk about this a lot, this guy Kenneth Wapnick, who is an actual theologian and obsessed with the Course in Miracles from like a philosophy standpoint, he said the whole idea of forgiveness is that it does nothing. It does absolutely nothing. It just smiles upon it. We smile upon the ego. We smile upon violence. We smile upon the fear because we know it's not there. And so this is the whole premise of the book, is that which is unreal does not exist. And so if we choose to see these things as like not even there, well, this is why the book's so long, is because it's like teaching us to like sort of deconstruct something that we created. And because we created it, we think it's real, but it's not.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Going back, I'm trying to understand what you were saying just now about violence, and like what I think I understood you saying, how violence, are you trying to figure out what violence means or comes from?
Yeah.
I think. Okay. And
yeah, what is the ultimate definition of violence is like a simple way to put it.
And I guess like my simple response, or a question following that isn't it like, as long as your intention is good, it's not violent, right? It's only violent if like I intend to do something. What I don't know, I'm confused. Birdie, what do you?
Violence is just like any thought of, first of all, violence is something we made up. It's not real. Like, okay, like the body, everything moves and changes in the physical world and it breaks down, and like the body breaks down. It's like, but the way that we see it is that it's violent. Like anything that is perceived as an attack on our ego is violence. Like that's just what violence is to the Course in Miracles. And violence is, as you said, Michelle, it's a thought. Like bodies like can assault and break each other down, but it doesn't, what happens to bodies is kind of irrelevant. Like the Course in Miracles is trying to teach you that anything that happens to your body that is perceived as an attack or illness or death or scarcity or sacrifice is not real. So violence in the Course is just like any ego thought, because the ego is just this small little separate self that's trying to protect itself. We think that we created ourselves, so we don't think that we have this larger force that's protecting us, if that makes sense. So we think we're alone in the world because we created ourselves, and so that causes an instinct in us to have to protect ourselves and protect the ego and like see other people as separate from us. And so the Course would just say any thought of fear is a form of violence, but it's still ridiculous and unnecessary, and we shouldn't give it more power than it's needed. Because like fighting thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, it says fear is really nothing and love is everything, right? So that sort of like boils it down to that, existential duality. There's a sculpture that they just put up in Union Square called The Only Other Thing Is Nothing, and it's huge. It's made out of, I think, metal. And after I read Nothing and Everything Cannot Coexist, to believe in one is to deny the other, fear is really nothing and love is everything, I was like, oh my God, this really is the upside down world. Like that's like where, dominance and power systems derive like their authority, from this idea that here is everything, but here is also a fear-based, control matrix. So they've really done like a great job as far as society goes, making us believe that like everything is in this plane and like physical, and then everything outside it is just like the darkness, when the opposite is most likely true.
Yeah. And it says, like, I like this quote where it's like, spiritual vision literally cannot see error and merely looks for the atonement. And so it's like, I like this other quote too, where it's like, if you think that your brother is trying to take God away from you, then you're very sorely mistaken. So I think part of it too is like learning that we have control over how we perceive the situation. So, and once you change, and that's all we can change. That's it. Like we can either have spiritual sight and smile upon it and shine the light on it, because that's like, what's that like corny thing? It's like they think they can get rid of the sun, but all they can do is block it. Like it's not, the sunshine's not gone. It's just temporarily blocked. And so what we're trying to do is just like break down the psychological barriers that we have constructed. And we have to forgive ourselves for that. Like we can't, like we did this to ourselves, like and it's not our fault. Like we can't help it. And it's not the people who are doing it. It's not their fault either. Like they're acting like little ego selves. And like the other thing is that every single person in front of us is a reflection of us. Like God has only one son. We are all the same person. And so it's like when we learn to see the light in other people, then we ourselves are absolved of guilt. And so like we need to remember the atonement and forgiveness, because that's the only way out of it. And that frees us from the past. Like that's the most tremendous part of the whole book that we have to really focus on. And it's true, like you can't shine the light on the problem without first identifying it. But once you see the problem, you don't correct it by overanalyzing it, which we're not. We're correctly identifying it. But we have to move forward from that onward. And it's really, really hard, especially now for all the reasons we talk about. But I think there's something really, really powerful and freeing about refusing to participate in it anymore. Like, because it's not helping at all. And it just perpetuates like what it is that we're trying to free ourselves from. And it just makes us feel better. Like, it's like the whole thing is like, we want to be at peace. Like, we don't want to be in a state of mental illness or disordered thinking. Like we want to feel good. And that's what our inheritance is. Like we are here to feel good and at peace. And that's why we're doing this and doing the work, because it is work.
Yeah. They talk about the Last Judgment in terms of doing that work to become, miracle minded.
Yes.
I thought it was funny because they talked about the Last Judgment being capable of existing across eons or happening like in virtually immeasurable amount of time, which is like a very cosmic cool way to think about that. I've been pulling that card in tarot readings a lot lately. It's actually really funny. Every single reading I've done, like over the past month, the Judgment card has surfaced. So this is definitely like a collective moment we're all having right now for sure.
That's really beautiful.
Yeah, but to what you were saying, in that section, the author says you free yourself from fear quickly because you must emerge from the conflict if you are to bring peace to other minds.
Yes.
So that's sort of like the idea of self-alchemy, right? Going within, doing the inner work, which we hear a lot about, and it sort of almost becomes cliche, like, oh, fix yourself before you can do, anything in the greater world. But I think it's just interesting to think that self-healing is sort of a commitment or a resolution to stop punishing ourselves.
Yes.
And that to me is at least somewhat of a new idea, especially because punishment has been such a controlling force for so long, and we're conditioned to think of it as sort of like deserved.
Yes.
Since we got here.
Absolutely. Yep. And that's really beautiful, Michelle. I really like the part where it's like you think that the Last Judgment implies that an enormous amount of time is necessary between your readiness and mastery. But let me remind you that time and space are under my control. So like we'll get into this later. We don't have to do this today, but like we need to understand this concept that comes up in the book that's so beautiful is the holy instant, and that all that's needed is the willingness, and in an instant everything can change. And that's what the miracle is. It's like the willingness to like get rid of everything that we were perceiving before and let it shift. But with the punishment part, which is so great, it says the last judgment is generally thought of as a procedure undertaken by God. Actually, it will be undertaken by my brothers with my help. It is a final healing rather than a meting out of punishment, however much you think that punishment is deserved. Punishment is a concept totally opposed to right-mindedness, and the aim of the last judgment is to restore right-mindedness to you. The last judgment might be called a process of right evaluation. It simply means that everyone will finally come to understand what is worthy and what is not. After this, the ability to choose can be directed rationally. Until this distinction is made, however, the vacillations between free and imprisoned cannot but continue. So it's like the metaphor in AA where you like hit rock bottom and you're like, enough of this. Like I can't go on thinking like this anymore. So I love that. And it's like we have to free ourselves from not only punishing ourselves, but wanting to punish others for hurting us, which like, I mean, that's really a tall order, because who doesn't want to punish certain people right now? Like in Australia, they just started like shooting dogs at an animal shelter because like the stay-at-home order, and they're like, you can't come volunteer and take care of these dogs. And I was like, you know what? They should just shoot all the people who thought that was a good idea. But like, here we go. We're entering into a slippery slope.
How can you not have that response? Like, it's so...
Well, you gotta work. Like, we have to like, because it doesn't help, because we're just perpetuating more violence. Like, that's not what we want to do, because that just continues the feedback loop. So it's like, can we even imagine forgiving those people? That's like, it's hard.
No, it is hard, but you have to understand that there's people out there that are suffering so much more than we are. Like, there's the reason why people are doing those things is simply because they're in so much pain. It's a reflection of how much pain that they're feeling.
Exactly.
So you should always feel bad for someone who I don't care what they do. I mean, obviously it's fucked up. I mean, I had to forgive my stepmom, who Birdie, you and I both know I strongly dislike, but I feel bad. I got over it when I actually realized that, okay, like, she's making those choices because she's actually living in so much lack, and oh my God, poor thing. Like, that's just the truth of it all. So that's my only way of ever forgiving anyone, especially someone who kills dogs. Like, I mean, like, they're just suffering. Like, think about how much pain you have to be in. Think about how much pain. Like, that's how sad the whole thing is. Like,
and fear. Like, they did it out of fear. And this is where we go back. Sorry we'll like end the dog story there, but
yeah,
this is like, all sin is just a lack of love. It's fear and a lack of love, and it never, ever, ever calls for punishment. It always calls for forgiveness, because when you forgive something, you render it meaningless. And like, they wouldn't, like, when you render something meaningless, which we'll get into this later, it ceases to exist, which seems impossible right now, but it's true. And so that's, like, we have this like instinctual almost desire to like punish people, but it's like, and one example, like in the Knausgaard book, Our Struggle, in like book 5 or something, he talks about Hitler a lot, like, because Hitler's like the perennial bad guy who's like in hell forever. But it's like, he's like, can we even imagine like forgiving someone like that? Because if we don't, like, all the violence we see in the world is just different manifestations of the same errors in thinking. Like, that's what this book is saying. And so we have to correct the error at the level of the source, which is hard, but it just takes a little miracle mindedness. But Emily, have you been reading the book? Like, are you enjoying it? Like, or has it helped you at all? Is it confusing and horrible, or?
Yeah, no, I have been reading it. Sorry, I haven't been talking. I have a
Don't be
fear
sorry.
of speaking on Zoom, I think, which I should work on undoing. But yeah, I felt like I had to go through it and like really, really slowly reread passages, because some of the stuff I'm just like, I don't want to be resistant to it, but my mind is like stumbling over some of it. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I especially was like thinking a lot about the line on page 23 that says physical illness represents a belief in magic. And
Yes.
I was like, what does this mean? I was thinking a lot about, the Christian like battle against like magical thinking and magical belief. And I was like, I don't know if I agree with that like theological issue, but I was like, that's not what this is about. So I was really fascinated by that and wanted to ask about it, but I'm having a hard time conceptualizing what that even means.
Yes. That's a very, very good question. So that's actually funny. I was thinking about this like this morning about like, oh shit, I wonder if magic is going to come up, because magic is sort of like, according to the course, magic is sort of the mind's belief that it recognizes sort of half-heartedly that the mind recognizes half-heartedly that it does have an impact on the world and the perception of it, but it thinks that it can create everything by itself, if that makes sense. So the book, like this, unfortunately, this comes much later in the book, but it goes a lot more into physical illness. So according to this book, there is no illness. Like there's no sickness, there's no death, like everything, there is no death, period, like at all. We perceive death, we created it. So physical illness is a manifestation of attack against the body. And so to believe in attack, you sort of have to make some presumptuous, what's the word? It's sort of presumptuous because it says that something outside of you, like a force outside of you, is capable of attacking, hurting, and killing you.
Right.
When in reality, like the only real illness that we have is our disordered thinking. So it's just a fact that the body. So this is something that gets a lot bigger that I just ordered a book about by this like theologian about apparently in Gnosticism and Neoplatonist Christian thought, they do not believe that God created the body, which is like, I can't even wrap my head around that. Like, I have trouble with that. Like, so I kind of want to understand it more, but I think the idea of illness being a form of magic is kind of has to do with that, like it's our belief in a force outside of us that is capable of attacking and killing us, if that makes sense. Because, yeah. Because the body just breaks down and it changes form, and that's just a fact. And so like part of the reason this book is so obsessive about saying there is no death is because like and the resurrection is freedom from death. It shows us that there's no death. And that everything is just life, which is hard. Like it's just impossible almost to wrap our minds around that. But that's why they talk about revelation. It's like whether your revelation is like going out in the woods and eating a ton of mushrooms and getting the download, or like being on a hike or like something, or listening to music or making art. It's okay, whatever it is. But there are ways of experiencing the fact that there is no death, but they're few and far between. So I think we'll definitely start getting, I want to focus the next one definitely specifically on illness and death, because it's like the best part of the whole book, but it is tricky. Did that help at all?
Yeah, no, I think I think that's why, in the West, a lot of people are just so fucked up, is because we just don't know how to confront death or actually even conceptualize it. It's like the Christian model doesn't work because it's like, oh, it's the final judgment. You're either, in bliss or you're going to
hell.
never die, which is like a form of punishment for whatever reason. Yeah, so I find it like really fascinating, and would love to talk more about that part of the book.
I was also sort of like taken aback by the book's use of magic, because it seems so just, I don't know, what's the word, like,
I thought
it made me think of almost like back in the day when they would persecute people for practicing magic, and I was like, that's such a weird word to use in the context of this book, which otherwise was so obviously open-minded. I felt like the use of the word magic was a bit judgmental in a way.
Well, it
and maybe that's
says,
just me. Yeah.
it says over and over again, like, well, first of all, even if we don't agree with magic, the last thing we're going to do is go around and persecute people for practicing magic.
Right. Yeah. Forgive
yeah.
them for what they do. But then I thought about it more and read more, because magic came up a bunch in this chapter. And to me, it seems like magic was used to describe the corporeal realm, sort of like the realm of matter, right? And if one of the book's like basic premises is that the body is a learning vessel,
yes,
and the mind is, eternal and has control over the body, then I read the course ascribing magic to the body, and
yes,
will the power working its way through the body, which is like what Crowley says. Alchemists say that too. That's like the basic definition of magic, even in like Gnostic and occult circles. Sorry, that's New York City.
That's okay.
So yeah, I mean, that's sort of how I came to understand it, because I had a similar like initial reaction that Emily did, but then I was sort of able to reframe it.
Yeah.
I think in a way that the course may actually mean it, just in terms of magic being what's possible, physically, but in that way also limiting, because we are like limitless beings.
Yes, that's really good, because the hilarious irony to this is like Catholics and a lot of schools of Christianity like think this book is like pagan Satan, not like, they're like, it's magic, like,
yeah.
So that is like a level of irony, and it just said it's true, like what you said about like magic is sort of like like belief in the body's ability to create stuff that it just can't. And it says like and where you guys are talking about, it says it is essential to remember that only the mind can create, and that correction belongs at the thought level. To amplify an earlier statement, spirit is already perfect and therefore does not require correction. The body does not exist except as a learning device for the mind. This learning device is not subject to errors of its own because it cannot create. It is obvious then that inducing the mind to give up its miscreations is the only application of the creative ability that is truly meaningful. Magic is the mindless or miscreative use of the mind. Physical medications are forms of spells, but if you are afraid to use the mind to heal, you should not attempt to do so. So I also like, that part is crazy, but I really do like how the rest of the page says like, look, our belief in illness and sickness and everything is so strong that don't feel bad at all for like continuing to do things that make your physical body feel better. Like, it doesn't even try to get people to be like Christian Scientists. Like, it's just like, keep using whatever makes you feel better, but like understand that there's something bigger going on.
Yeah, I really appreciated that. That whole section legitimized the magic here for me. So yeah.
And I think it's symbolic too. Like it says over and over again, like these are symbols. And like the reason they use Christianity is because it's written in English. It was written in Western society. It's stuff we all grew up and kind of understand. They're like perennial religious themes. And so they're symbols, like they're not really to be taken super literally. Like they're just good stories. No, I don't think they'd be like, it's just a good story. But anyway, that's That's really interesting. That's so cool that I feel like I'm learning a lot too, that I had never, because some of this stuff is like so difficult. Like everything about magic before, and the few times I've read this, I was just like, I don't even know. Like, it's fine. Cool. It says I don't have to stop using like plant medicine, so I'm not. But it's really cool that we're like getting into this, I think. So I think the thing we need to remember the most is like, stop punishing ourselves, because when we punish ourselves, we're punishing other people and perpetuating a state of the world that doesn't need to exist. And a serious willingness that is necessary to shine the light on. And soon we'll get into the idea of like having private thoughts. Like, we think we can hoard away all these secrets and stuff. And I don't need to go into that right now, but anyway, and that we're all innocent, like every single one of us, like, and then I think it says over and over again, like, innocence is incapable of sacrificing anything, and it's incapable of being attacked, because it's there, and it's a force that we've sort of forgotten about too, and that we all have it, and that is part of like the absolving from guilt. So I think our homework is always to just like start absolving ourselves of that guilt, and that takes willingness. And that's why it's like, you didn't create yourself. Like, if you did create yourself, you actually would be guilty, and you would be capable of attacking other people and asserting force on into the world, but you didn't. Like, your mind is part of God's mind. We've just separated ourselves from it. So this is just a course in like going home, in some ways. And this isn't until the end of the book, but it says, whenever you have chosen wrongly, and you will know by how you feel, like if you feel miserable or fearful, you've chosen wrongly, just choose again. Like, it's as simple as that. That's all we have to do. And it just takes vigilance. So yeah, it's good. And like the idea of evil just being the past, like that doesn't have anything to do with God. That has to do with us. And we have to like have some help in correcting it, but we can. Also, the very idea of God is like, that can be a challenge too, because it's like the male God thing. I talked about this last time. Like, that can be a little tricky for me, but it's a symbol. It's like, it's so vast and beyond our comprehension. I mean, even like Orthodox Christians are very good at acknowledging that, like, if you think you can describe God, like, you're totally hubristic and stupid, but deserve to be forgiven. But
well, I mean, yeah, like the last section does talk about arrogance, right? I think the author even used the word arrogant.
Yep.
Which I thought was, that was a one to note, and that goes along with what you've been saying about looking up at God, when in actuality, if we're all made in the image of God, we all are God. We have gender duality here, obviously, and just sort of seems like gendering God is really insignificant ultimately, because everyone has, male and female, or whatever you want to call it.
It's true.
Within. So
that's very true.
That was interesting and empowering to sort of say that you're not arrogant for recognizing that you're divine.
Yep. You're arrogant in thinking that you created yourself, or that you can like separate yourself. That's what arrogance is thinking that you're just this little person who's like subject to violence and violence against others. That's beautiful. Yeah. I love that. Yep.
Well, ego, it's your ego.
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
The chapter 4, illusions of the ego, is probably my favorite chapter in the whole book. And so to just wrap this up, this is really beautiful. It says, the journey to the cross should be the last useless journey. Do not dwell upon it, but dismiss it as accomplished. If you can accept it as your own last useless journey, you are also free to join my resurrection. Until you do so, your life is indeed wasted. It merely reenacts the separation, the loss of power, the futile attempts of the ego at reparation, and finally the crucifixion of the body, or death. Such repetitions are endless until they are voluntarily given up. Do not make the pathetic error of clinging to the old rugged cross. The only message of the crucifixion is that you can overcome the cross. Until then, you are free to crucify yourself as often as you choose. This is not the gospel I intended to offer you. We have another journey to undertake, and if you will read these lessons carefully, they will help prepare you to undertake it. But I love that. It's like, we don't have to keep like nailing ourselves to a cross, but we're allowed to if we want to. So it's a useless journey and we don't need to do it anymore. So I hope this week we don't hang ourselves on a cross. Like I hope the information like you can carry with you and feel good. Because it sounds so corny, but it's like there's so much bigger, I don't know, it's like a new age thing they say all the time, but it's like there's so like what we see is only like 5% of what's going on. Like there's so much going on, like 99% of what's happening in the universe we can't see it. Like, and so we're developing the spiritual sight to understand what's truly going on. And like it's a benevolent, loving universe. Like it's just light, and we don't need to pinch ourselves off from it. So yeah, it's Zoom. I don't want to like everybody's been really amazing. I don't want to like keep people. Sorry I talk so much. Or does anyone do we have any questions more this week? Does everyone feel like a little better, like since they started reading it?
Yeah, actually going through it the second times, it gets better and better, like you said, Birdie.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's been so far, it's been amazing, especially during this time that we are living in.
Oh yeah.
Like what a time to dive deep, It's like I feel like I have no choice other than to do it, So yeah, it's really liberating. And that's why I enjoy reading this book.
I'm really glad that you enjoy it. I think, and it's like the great thing too, we remember is that like, even though it takes willingness and we shouldn't like really half-ass anything, but it's like the AA saying, like, take what you need and leave the rest. Cause it's like, I don't know if God didn't create the body, like how I can't even wrap my mind around that. But I'm not going to dwell on that at all. Like, because there's so much in here that is so practical and helpful and profound that it's like some of the stuff, like the magic stuff and miscreating, it's like, oh, we can just like set that. We don't have to, but it is interesting. We don't have to agree with all of it, but I don't think there's been a better book that describes the ego and offers solutions to it like this one. So I hope everyone's getting good stuff out of it. And thanks for doing this. Like it's really fun. Like it's actually really, really, I look forward to it. It's great. And it just, we're showing willingness and we're doing the work, and that's good.
Yeah,
So,
thanks, Birdie. You're a legend. Thanks for hosting this.
Thanks.
So nice to meet everyone. You guys are epic too. Like seriously, it's just so nice that there's like-minded people out there.
I think it'll continue. Like should we keep doing this?
Yeah.
Okay. I think every 2 weeks is still good. And I'm really grateful.
Every 2 weeks or not every week?
I think it should be,
I guess it takes a while to read. Okay.
Do you think
I just
every
have
2
a lot of
weeks is
time in my
better?
hands.
Do you think
I don't
2 weeks
care.
Yeah, I think a lot of book clubs usually meet like every 2 weeks, and it allows people, this is just like the most vapid thing that's ever come out of my mouth. I'm gonna be better at like posting stuff on social just so people can like get little crumbs of it that
engage with the content.
Yeah, engage with the content. But just to like stay in touch and we can like communicate over what's going on. And I talk to most of you anyway, and I'm always here.
Yeah,
so.
it'd be cool if you know the Instagram account is going to become a thing, and whoever's on Instagram can, you know, maybe pose questions in between, you know, our meeting time.
That's a great idea. That's a really, really good idea. I'm gonna put that on there. But well, I'm really grateful we all came together again. It's great to see you again, Emily and Joseph and my darling Michelle and Eve.
Love you.
I love you too. I hope you all have a wonderful Sunday. And oh wait, there's no more questions, right? Like, do we feel like we got somewhere? Okay.
Yeah.
And of course, just like text or email me or DM me on the Instagram. Although, like, I wish this had been written in the time of Instagram. Maybe I should write like a epilogue to it, because there is no better reflection of the ego and the small separated doom scroll self than Instagram and the Twitter. So
I know, what a place.
yeah, it's a true hell, but we created it.
A lot of people are suffering. Okay, a lot of people are
It's
suffering.
true, and it's reflecting.
Always remember.
It's true.
Always remember.
That's hilarious. And we can offer them light. That's what we're doing. We're God's little miracle workers.
Yep.
Yes.
Instagram is the medium of the miracle.
Instagram is the medium of miracles. Okay, let's get out of here and let's go work miracles this week. Just
okay.
okay, bye.
Love
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you,
Guys.
Emily. Bye, Joseph.